Have you ever had that feeling that someone stabbed you in the back? Not literally, of course. We're talking about that betrayal that hurts more than any physical wound. It's a strange pain, isn't it? It feels like the world stopped for a few seconds. And then comes that urge for revenge, even if you're the most peaceful person in the world. Well, this story that our brain tells when we're betrayed isn't new. Actually, over 2,000 years ago, an 18-year-old young man lived exactly that, only on a scale you can't even imagine. Imagine discovering that Julius Caesar, not your biological father, but the one who chose you, adopted you, gave you a name, was assassinated by 60 Roman senators on March 15, 44 BC. Right there, in the political heart of Rome, inside the Senate itself. 23 stab wounds because these guys thought he was going to become king and end the republic. And it wasn't just any assassination. It was something so brutal, so calculated, that we still talk about it today. They made sure everyone saw it. It was a public spectacle of blood. This kid could have cried, hidden, fled far away. After all, he was just a sick teenager against 60 of the most powerful men in the world. But you know what he did? Well, he did something that only really smart people do when they're at a disadvantage. He stopped to think. While everyone expected him to freak out, he simply disappeared, vanished from the map for a few weeks. And you know what impresses me most about this story? This kid had no muscles, no military experience, no powerful allies, but he had something his enemies completely underestimated. He understood how people work. Like, imagine the scene. 60 guys killed his father and are celebrating like they're heroes. Everyone in Rome is kind of lost, not knowing what to think. And then this young man appears, kind of skinny, kind of sickly, and makes a move so simple it's genius. He didn't ask for revenge. He didn't threaten anyone. He simply started signing with his dead father's name. And when people said, "Hey, you can't do that," he responded with something even smarter. But before I tell you what happened next, there's something you need to understand about this whole story. You know when you were a kid and your mom or dad scolded you in front of your friends? Remember the shame you felt? Well, now imagine that multiplied by 1,000. The guys who killed Caesar not only did it in front of everyone, but also went around shouting that they were heroes. It's like when someone humiliates you publicly and then expects you to thank them. Kind of weird, right? And here's the point. They made the most basic mistake that exists. They thought that killing the leader meant killing the idea. It's like trying to put out a fire by throwing gasoline on it. It only makes things worse. Because you see, Caesar wasn't just a person. He was a symbol, and symbols, well, symbols are kind of immortal. You can destroy the person, but their memory? That sticks to people's minds like gum and hair. And this 18-year-old kid understood that better than any experienced Roman politician. He realized he didn't need to be Caesar to use Caesar's power. He just had to become his living memory. That's where things get interesting. Because when the people of Rome saw this young man fulfilling the promises that his father had left in his will, man, it was like when you promise something to your kid and don't deliver. Then Grandpa comes and does exactly what you should have done. Only here, Grandpa was an 18-year-old kid, and the gift was 75 denarii for every Roman citizen. Think about it. Mark Antony, who was like Caesar's right-hand man, took all the money and said, "This inheritance isn't yours, kid." Any normal person would be pissed, right? But this kid, he did something nobody expected. He sold his own stuff. Sold family lands, jewelry, everything. And you know why? To pay out of his own pocket what Caesar had promised the people. Imagine the scene. You have Mark Antony, a famous, powerful general, who took the money and kept it for himself. And on the other side, you have a sickly teenager who sold even the shirt off his back to keep his dead father's word. In the people's minds, who do you think became Caesar's true son? And the assassins? Well, they were there celebrating, thinking they had solved everything, when suddenly they realized something kind of scary. The people weren't applauding them. Actually, the people were looking at them in a strange way. You know when you make a joke you think is funny but everyone stays silent? It's more or less that vibe. And then a scene happened that must have been chilling. Mark Antony went up to the platform to give Caesar's funeral speech. And the guys thought, cool, he's going to speak well of us, right? After all, we saved Rome. Only Mark Antony was like that friend of yours who has the gift of gab to sell ice at the North Pole. The guy started saying that Brutus was an honorable man. Everyone agreed. Then he repeated, Brutus is an honorable man, and repeated again and again. Have you ever noticed how a word loses meaning when you say it many times in a row? Well, here it was worse. With each repetition, that word honorable became something kind of rotten, like sour milk. And when he showed Caesar's torn tunic, with the 23 holes from the stab wounds, man, things went completely off the rails. But what really changed the game was when this 18-year-old kid made a move that not even the most experienced politicians saw coming. He started signing Gaius Julius Caesar Octavianus. Not Octavian, adoptive son of Caesar. Not Octavian, heir of Caesar. Simply, Caesar. It's like when you get married and change your last name. Only here the last name came with an army of fans included. And you know what's most genius? When people looked at him, they didn't see a skinny kid. They saw Caesar. The memory of the guy who threw grand parties, who conquered territories, who put food on their tables. The Legion veterans. These tough guys who had followed Caesar through Gaul looked at this young man and thought, it's our general's son. And Roman veterans aren't people you want to mess with, you know? Meanwhile, Brutus and Cassius were having an existential crisis. They had killed Caesar to end the dictatorship, but suddenly another Caesar was appearing. And this one was being smarter than the original. Because the original Caesar was sometimes kind of arrogant, you know? Kind of I'm the man. But this new Caesar, he was humble. He paid the bills. He kept promises. And that's when the assassins realized they had made the biggest strategic error in Roman history. They had created a martyr. And martyrs, man, martyrs are way too dangerous. It's like when you complain about your boss and he gets fired. Then a new boss comes who's much worse, and everyone misses the previous one. Only here the situation was much more complicated, because this new boss was 18 years old, smart as hell, and had a thirst for revenge that would make any Hollywood screenwriter jealous. And you know what impresses me most? Brutus, the guy who delivered the most painful stab, was practically a son to Caesar. Imagine the scene. You raise a guy, love him like family, and then he kills you for principles. It's heartbreaking, isn't it? But here's the part nobody tells properly. While everyone was discussing politics and philosophy, this kid was quietly putting together the biggest revenge scheme the world has ever seen. And he wasn't going to do it screaming in desperation. No. He was going to do it methodically, with patience. Like someone playing chess while others are playing checkers. And his first move was so simple, but so genius, that people still study this strategy today. He did exactly what you would do if you were smart. He allied himself with his enemy's enemy. You know when you have a problem with someone at school or work, then you team up with that person who also doesn't like them? It's more or less like that. Mark Antony hated Brutus and Cassius. Octavian hated Brutus and Cassius. Simple math, right? Common enemy equals temporary friendship. Only here, there's a plot twist you won't believe. These two guys hated each other too. Mark Antony thought the kid was a pain in the ass, an opportunist. And Octavian thought Mark Antony was an irresponsible drunk. But you know what they did? Swallowed their pride and pretended they were best friends. Because sometimes in life, you have to work with people you can't stand to achieve something bigger. And then they did something that still gives chills today. They sat at a table, literally on an island, in the middle of a river, and made a list of names. It wasn't a shopping list. It was a list of people who were going to die. And when you see what happened to these people, Man, it's blood-chilling. Because this list wasn't just, let's kill Caesar's assassins. No, it was let's kill everyone who might bother us in the future. Relatives, rivals, rich people who had money they wanted, everyone. And the worst part, they put the list in the public square, like a bulletin board, only instead of selling used sofa, it was so-and-so, death sentence. Anyone could kill the people on the list, and they even got a reward for it. Imagine the terror this must have caused. You woke up in the morning, went to the square for coffee, and suddenly saw your name on a death list. And it was no use running away, because there were bounty hunters after you throughout the Mediterranean. And you know what was the most shocking name that appeared on this list? Cicero, the guy who was like the most respected intellectual in Rome. An elderly gentleman who only knew how to write beautiful speeches. Why did they kill Cicero? Because he had called Mark Antony a drunk and incompetent in public. That's right. The guy died because he spoke badly of the wrong politician. And when they found Cicero, well, let's just say what they did to him was a very clear message to anyone who dared criticize the new power holders. But while Rome was turning into a sea of blood, something very interesting was happening in Greece. Brutus and Cassius weren't sitting around crying in corners. They were doing exactly what you would do if you knew people wanted your head, arming themselves to the teeth. And man, they really armed themselves. 19 legions. Do you have any idea what that means? It's like having 100,000 professional soldiers under your command. People who knew how to kill and had no problem with it. But you know how they got all this army? Stealing, extorting, plundering the eastern provinces like there was no tomorrow. It's kind of ironic, isn't it? The guys who killed Caesar for being a tyrant were behaving exactly like, well, tyrants. And here's the most interesting part. While Octavian and Mark Antony were busy killing people in Rome, Brutus was having an existential crisis. The guy couldn't sleep properly. They said he saw ghosts, that he was being tormented by nightmares. Just imagine, you kill someone who loved you like a son, for principles, and then you discover that maybe it was all a gigantic mistake, that maybe you didn't save the Republic, you destroyed it. But Cassius was different. He had that energy of, I already did it, now let's go to the end. And he convinced Brutus of something that would change everyone's destiny. We can't stay here waiting, he said. They're coming after us anyway, we better go after them. You know when you have a problem that's going to happen inevitably, and then you think, better solve it once and for all? That's the vibe. Only Cassius was wrong, completely wrong. His strategy was to wait. Stay on the defensive. Let Octavian and Mark Antony spend money, resources, let their soldiers get tired from so much marching. It was the perfect plan. They had control of the sea, had guaranteed supplies, were in an advantageous position. But Brutus couldn't take it anymore. He wanted to end it quickly. He was being consumed by guilt, by nightmares, by pressure from his own soldiers who wanted action. And then they made a decision that, well, you'll see. Because when the two armies met on a plain in Greece, it wasn't just a battle that was about to happen. It was the end of an entire era. 200,000 people, almost the population of a medium city, about to kill each other because of 23 stab wounds that happened years before. And what happened on that battlefield was so bizarre, so full of twists, it looks like a movie script. Imagine two soccer games happening at the same time, on the same field, but with completely opposite results. That's exactly what happened. On the right side, Brutus was crushing it, literally destroying Octavian's troops. The 18-year-old kid almost died there, had to run away, hide, see his soldiers being massacred. Brutus was celebrating, thinking he had won the war. But on the left side, Mark Antony was making mincemeat of Cassius's troops. And here's where things get tragic in a way you can't imagine. Cassius was on a hill, trying to see what was happening on the battlefield, but there was a lot of dust, a lot of confusion. and from a distance he saw soldiers running toward Brutus's camp. He thought, "That's it. We lost. Brutus was defeated." But you know what was really happening? It was Brutus's own soldiers celebrating victory. They had won and were going back to tell the good news. Cassius didn't know that. He looked at that scene, saw what seemed like total defeat, and did the most tragic thing you can imagine. He asked his most faithful slave to kill him. And you know the cruelest detail? Legend says it was with the same dagger he used to kill Caesar. Half an hour later, Brutus's messengers arrived shouting, "We won! We won!" But it was too late. When Brutus saw the body of his friend, his brother-in-law, the guy who had planned everything with him, he collapsed. He called Cassius the last of the true Romans, but the war wasn't over, and 3 weeks later, 3 weeks of tension, of demoralized soldiers, of Brutus being consumed by guilt and pressure. He knew time was against him. The soldiers wanted to go home. Some were already deserting. And then he made the same mistake as Cassius. He went on the attack when he should have waited. Only this time, there was no twist. It was pure massacre. Brutus's troops were shattered, and he had to flee to the mountains with a few faithful soldiers. And there, hidden in a cave, hearing the enemy's victory cries below, Brutus finally understood something terrible. He hadn't saved the Republic. He had completely destroyed it. You know what he said that night? "Maybe virtue is just an empty word, and I was a slave to fate all this time." Man, imagine the pain. You kill someone who loves you for an ideal, destroy your own life, see your friends dying, and in the end realize it was all in vain. He asked one of his faithful soldiers to hold the sword, and threw himself on the blade. With Brutus dead, you'd think the story was over, right? But no, because there was still a list with 58 names that needed to be crossed out. And Octavian, this kid everyone underestimated, he was going to cross out each name, one by one, for years. Some tried to flee to the ends of the earth. Others hid, changed identities. One even became a pirate. But it was no use. Octavian had patience, resources, and a memory that didn't forget. The last guy on the list died 14 years after the assassination. 14 years. The guy spent more than a decade looking over his shoulder, knowing that someday the bill would come. And when the last name was crossed out, something happened that Brutus and Cassius could never have imagined. Octavian didn't declare himself dictator like Caesar. He was smarter, much smarter. He kept the Senate, kept the elections, kept all the appearance of the Republic, but quietly concentrated all real power in his own hands. The army, the money, the important provinces, everything his. And you know how he became known? Augustus, Rome's first emperor. He ruled for more than 40 years, died old, in bed, being worshipped as a god. And here's the cruelest irony of this whole story. Brutus and Cassius killed Caesar because they were afraid he would become king. The result? They paved the way for someone much more powerful than any king. Caesar had limitations. Caesar had enemies. Caesar was sometimes impulsive. Augustus? Augustus was Caesar without the weaknesses. And he ruled an empire that lasted more than 500 years. In the end, those 23 stab wounds didn't prevent tyranny. They just chose the tyrant. And maybe that's the most frightening lesson of this whole story. Sometimes, when you try to prevent something terrible, you end up creating something much worse. Because between a living Caesar and a dead Caesar, transformed into a symbol, well, the dead one always wins.